and welcome back to the pricing channel for small businesses. Today we're going to talk about pricing and some other very important topics related to pricing that we'll see over and over again in this series of videos. So let's get to it and start with pricing. So what is pricing? Well, pricing is a process for nominating a monetary value for something that we want to sell. And so when we nominate that monetary value, that becomes the price of our product or service. And depending on what country we're dealing with or selling in, the price can be in dollars, pesos, euros, or any other currency. And when we have established the price for our product or service, this now allows customers to decide whether they want to purchase it or not. And typically they'll make some kind of valuation about the price relative to the value they expect to receive. Now notice in this, we said we nominate a price. And that's because we don't technically set a price. It's really the marketplace of consumers and competitors and others who end up setting the eventual price. So let's talk about that. What is market pricing? Well, in its simplest case, when a buyer and a seller make a deal, they establish a market price when they agree on a price for the transaction. Competition in the marketplace also helps to set market prices, because when we have competition, then customers have choices. And part of that choice is they have different prices to consider for products that they're interested in. Supply and demand also helps to set market prices. We're probably familiar with the fact that when supply increases relative to demand, price tends to go down. And when demand increases relative to supply, price also tends to go up. And this is a concept that we're very familiar with in the context of gasoline. We know that when gasoline supplies are plentiful, that prices tend downward. And when gasoline supplies tighten up, then of course prices start to increase. So this thing about supply and demand and price is a pretty important factor in setting market prices. And supply and demand go together with price because price is the variable that balances supply with demand. And so how does that work? Well, in the case where supply increases relative to demand, sellers reduce the price of their goods in order to sell those goods. And so when they reduce those prices, this brings in more consumers into the marketplace, which raises demand and eventually balances the market out to the point where supply and demand are equal at some given price. Similarly, when demand increases relative to supply, sellers increase their prices. Some consumers drop out of the market because they're no longer willing to pay what the price has risen to. This lowers demand in the marketplace and again brings about a balance point between supply and demand at some particular price. So let's look at price and demand from another perspective. How much does the demand for a particular product change when its price changes? Well, this relationship between demand change and price change is something we call price elasticity. And the formula for price elasticity is that price elasticity equals the change in demand divided by the change in price, where the little delta or triangle sign stands for change. So the original demand minus the new demand divided by the original price minus the new price. That's what price elasticity is. So let's look at an example. Let's say we have a product and we reduce the price of our product by 1%. And when we do that, we observe a demand increase of 3%. When we plug those numbers into the formula for price elasticity, it's plus 3% demand increase divided by minus 1% price decrease equals minus 3. And so we say this particular product has a price elasticity of minus 3. Now, so far we haven't said much about the customer, but indeed the customer does play an important part in all of this. Because customers typically have a budget in mind for what they will pay for something they're looking for. And this mental budget is something we call their willingness to pay. And what's important about this is willingness to pay is usually the maximum that they're willing to pay for something. And so if your price for a product that they're interested in exceeds their willingness to pay or their mental budget, it's very likely they won't buy from you. So let's look at an example. Let's say that we're thinking about giving a dinner party for some customers. And so we decide that we want to cook steaks for the dinner. And even before we go shopping, we mentally set a budget in our mind or set a willingness to pay of $6.98 per pound for steak. What happens is, when we get to the store, we will mentally ignore all steaks priced above $6.98 a pound. And then we'll focus on those steaks that are priced at $6.98 a pound or less, and we'll most likely make our choice based on those in that price range. So if we price below a customer's willingness to pay, does that mean that we're going to make the sale to them? Well, not necessarily, because customers can shop for other products below their willingness to pay. And the reason or their motivation for doing that is that by shopping for a variety of products priced below their willingness to pay, they can pick the product that maximizes something we call their consumer surplus, where consumer surplus is defined as their willingness to pay minus the particular price they're looking at. And so what customers do is they tend to pick a product that maximizes their consumer surplus. Now you might be saying, well, that's got to be the lowest priced product, isn't it? Yeah, that's true. And that's the way sellers look at this. Sellers think that customers always go for the lowest price. But from the consumer standpoint, they're thinking about maximizing their consumer surplus. Okay, so we covered some really important topics there. Let's go back and review those before we call this video a wrap. So we've talked about several important topics here, price and those things related to price. So let's just do a quick review of what we covered today. Price is a process for nominating a monetary value for something we want to sell. When a buyer and a seller strike a deal, they create something called a market price. And competition gives customers choices, which also affects the market price for products and services. Supply and demand affect market prices also. And price elasticity is a measure of how much demand changes when price changes. And customers have mental budgets for what they're willing to pay for a product, and this mental budget is something we call their willingness to pay. And when customers are out shopping for products, they look at several, they look at the prices that are available because they're seeking to maximize their consumer surplus, where consumer surplus is defined as willingness to pay minus price. And there you have it. We'll see those topics again in upcoming videos. And the reason why we care about those topics, and the reason why we care about pricing strategies, tactics, tools, and actions is to use all of those to help you maximize the profitability of your business. And what do we mean by profitability? Well, that's a subject we'll take up in the next video. Hope to see you there.